Welcome back. As you've been following, everybody's been following what's been going on with President Trump for the last 3 years. We have seen the establishment bureaucracy, people who were opposed to his election, try to overthrow the election, making up false charges. Now we see this shameful impeachment process where President Trump is not allowed to call witnesses. The Republicans were not allowed to call any witnesses and so forth. Do you think that this is limited to President Trump? It's not. You should be very afraid of the tactics of the left. It's not limited to the Democrats in Washington. This is pervasive throughout the Democrats at every level. And it is happening in Washington state too, a very popular Republican state legislator there. Of course, rural areas of Washington and Oregon are heavily Republican, but of course the cities are not, and they do not have control of the legislature. And this headline, I think, says it all out of spokesman.com. Representative Matt Shea wants to call witnesses to prove the accusations against him are false. Now, why wouldn't he be allowed to have due process? Why wouldn't he be allowed to have witnesses called? You don't lose your constitutional protections just because you get elected to office, right? But if they can do it to President Trump, if they can do it to Matt Shea, you better believe that they're going to do it to you as well. And they have. I've talked about this many, many times. I last talked to Matt Shea. We had him on the program back in December. The Democrats who didn't like him because of his politics, they didn't like him because he helped to expose the criminal actions, the lies of the BLM, the FBI, and the Department of Justice, and the criminal trial that was being conducted against the Bundys. We had a BLM whistleblower. Matt Shea was responsible for getting the truth out, and it shut down that prosecution. But of course, you now have the Federal Department of Justice saying they want to still reopen that, even though you had a judge say, shut that down, declare that it was, dismiss it with prejudice, which says that it's not eligible under the rules of law. But we don't have the rule of law anymore. When you have somebody who is a state representative and they're demanding that he be expelled from the legislature, even though he's been elected, I think, 6 times, he wants to call witnesses? No, you're not going to call witnesses. And so I wanted to get an update from Representative Matt Shea and have him tell you what's going on. Again, you can follow what's going on, and you can support Matt if you want at voteshea.com. That's SHEA, voteshea.com. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me on again, David. I really appreciate it. And it's pretty incredible what's happening here in Washington State. Yeah. You know, we have this. I was actually told that due process doesn't apply here. And my response to that is, if you're going to label somebody a criminal, in this case, they're trying to label everybody involved with the Bundy situation, everybody involved with the Malheur situation, and everybody involved in the Priest River, Idaho situation, domestic terrorists. If you're going to label somebody a criminal, due process always applies when it's a government entity. That's the entire point behind it. So we are fighting back very hard right now. And citizens around Washington State are rallying. Some local county Republican parties are now issuing resolutions condemning the actions that have occurred at the state level.
Yeah, I think you've got at least 6 different counties that have come out in support of you, and a couple of other organizations that have come out in support of you. Some of them have passed resolutions at the county level saying that they are going to, there's going to be repercussions in terms of their support for any Republicans who would join the Democrats to expel you out of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and it's important for everybody watching to understand that there has only been one representative expelled from the Washington State Legislature, and that representative had their opportunity at due process and was convicted of a crime before discussion of expulsion was even brought up. And yet here you have what is very clearly a Marxist tactic and strategy to attempt to silence opposition, and especially opposition that's very effective at exposing government corruption and the overreach of the Obama administration.
Absolutely. And what you did, and the people who were there, and I was one of the people who was there at the Bundy Ranch, what we did was we talked about the illegal criminal actions of the BLM and the FBI, how they were threatening people with violence, how they were taking away property rights and so forth. We talked about how this is playing into the 2030 agenda, the UN agenda to take this all away, and stood up for that. And that's why they're coming after you. That's why they're trying to punish you. And of course, they're not going to stop there. They'll probably come after me, I guess, because I told the truth about what was going on there. They don't like people telling the truth. Just look at Julian Assange, right? He told the truth. He showed the documents and so forth. They're trying to torture him to death. This is something that everybody should be concerned about. It is happening at every level. And Matt, I just want to read a quote here from the Daily World. They quoted a person. They quoted the authors of this report that the progressive left in Washington State commissioned about you. And here's a quote. "It is more probable than not that Representative Shea is likely to plan, direct, and engage in additional future conflicts that could carry with them significant risk of bloodshed." So in other words, what they're saying, it's probable, it's likely that in the future he might do something, so let's throw him out. And let's call him a domestic terrorist because he stood up for the rights and showed. I mean, we had a BLM whistleblower that you were a part of putting those documents out. A BLM whistleblower called out his own people and talked about what was going on. That's why they were unable to get their conviction.
That's absolutely right. It's fascinating that we are actually here, something that Infowars has been talking about for years, and people said, oh, don't worry about it, it's never going to happen. We are here right now. This is pre-crime. I mean, you just read it. That's pre-crime. One of the other things that they came against me for was saying that I used encrypted email and encrypted text services. And a reporter came up to me the other day and tried to make it sound nefarious. I looked at him, I said, millions of Americans are using encrypted technology, number one. Number two, that's not the question. The question is, why is the U.S. government surveilling innocent Americans across the board without a warrant? Why is that happening?
Exactly.
That's the real question.
That's the new normal that they put on us. It's like, if you're trying to thwart our unconstitutional surveillance, you're the criminal. That's absolutely amazing.
It is. And, it bears repeating. And I know many of the people watching today know this. But down in Nevada, that case was dismissed with prejudice, as you said, because of this widespread misconduct, the government withholding exculpatory evidence down in Nevada. In Oregon, the leaders there were acquitted by a jury of their peers. And up in Nevada, when the VA tried to claim that they could take a veteran's firearms rights, we stood on the front lawn with the county sheriff. He was standing next to us. You could see the video of it. It's still online. And they're trying to call that domestic terrorism. And oh, by the way, the VA reversed their position 2 days later because we stood up successfully to that out-of-control Obama administration.
And this is very important because as we see this fight developing in Virginia, the Democrats coming in and saying, we don't care what the Second Amendment says, and we don't care about due process. We're going to take the guns from people, and we will kill you if necessary. And so you have across Virginia, even in Virginia Beach, which is typically urban and liberal, they came out and said, we're not going to support that kind of movement. But you got sheriffs across and elected local representatives. And folks, I want to tell you in Virginia and everywhere else in this country that if they can do this to Matt Shea, they're going to do this to your local elected representatives. They will do it to your local sheriff, and then they'll come after you. I mean, we have to stand together at this point or we're going to hang separately. And that's exactly what they're trying to do to Matt Shea. Now, one of the other things that they hate about you, Matt, is the fact that you are explicitly Christian, like the founders, and that gets you labeled as a terrorist. One of this Daily World article that I quoted from, where they were talking about your pre-crime commission of things, you're likely in the future to plan something that could be bad. They began this article by calling you an ordained rabble-rouser. They said you are a diviner of divisive thought, a political and spiritual activist. You sow deep distrust of authority. Of course, we should trust these people who are snooping on us, who are threatening to shoot us on sight if we don't hand over our guns, and they want to lock us all up, as we saw from the Bernie Sanders supporter. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back and get Matt's comments about the crime of being a Christian. And, of course, that's to the radical LGBT people who just put in the new Democrat speaker in Washington State. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to Matt Shea. And in a statement that Matt Shea put out before the legislature came back this Monday, he said something that really echoes what happened with President Trump. He said, I've been falsely accused of being a domestic terrorist, quote unquote. by a private investigator who never spoke to the principals involved in the incident she described. Instead relied on anonymous sources. And of course, this sounds just like President Trump's situation with impeachment, right? They called all these people, put together a statement and a complaint who weren't there. It was based on hearsay and put it up as, anonymous sources who came up with hearsay evidence. And then all the people that were called in the trial that we saw in Washington, these were witnesses, so-called witnesses who never witnessed anything. They never saw anything. They never heard anything, but they were called witnesses. These are the tactics that are being used from President Trump down to state legislators and down to you. This is what they're going to do to you as a gun owner. They will do this to you as a conservative. They're going to lock you up. Doesn't matter what the pretense is. And Matt, you pointed out in your statement that you, this Speaker of the House there in Washington State, forwarded that investigation, that dossier, to the FBI, but they've not contacted you about that, right?
Never. I've never been questioned about these incidents ever. It's never happened. And at least in the month since then, if they're going to paint me, like I'm some sort of, massive threat to society, you would think that I would at least have received a phone call, but that hasn't happened. In fact, the only contact was when the FBI contacted me last summer to warn me of a death threat from somebody associated with the Socialist Rifle Association. It was a direct threat against me and my family. So, which I'm grateful for, by the way. But this is the type of thing that they're throwing out there. This is the weaponization of political labels. These folks failed to interview at least 36 material witnesses and counting, and I'm telling you, it's probably over 50 at this point, David. They failed to interview them. Then they try to come across as this is some sort of an official report, which spent $100,000 of taxpayer money to do this, which essentially is an opposition research piece.
Yeah, exactly. It's a hack. One of the things that you said in your statement is if the speaker actually believes that you're a domestic terrorist, then she ought to rely on law enforcement and an FBI to do their job and to investigate this and to charge you if they think that there's something there. But I like what you had to say in the statement. I want to read from it here. Elected officials who casually accuse others of crimes without waiting for prosecutors to charge, much less for juries to convict, all with an eye toward overturning the results of elections they disagree with, are an ugly, corrosive feature of our modern political landscape. Boy, that says everything. That describes what's happening to you as well as what's happening to President Trump. It's absolutely amazing that they would do this. But again, in your case, I mean, they're ramping this up to say that you are a terrorist. They never interviewed any of these people, and they're just proceeding on with this. The FBI doesn't see anything with this, and this is clearly politically motivated. As we were getting ready to go to break, I said one of the other things that they really hate about you is the fact that you are explicitly Christian. They call you an ordained rabble-rouser, a political and spiritual activist who has a distrust of authority, as the founders of this country did. That's why we have the kind of separation of powers, between the federal and the state governments and within the federal government, because they distrusted authority and they knew that it corrupt people. And now we have seen how that works with the Democrats in Washington, haven't we?
We have, and I'm an unashamed Christian. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I will never shy away from that. I will never back down from that. And it's not just President Trump. It's not just me at the local level. Also, Congressman Steve King. He was stripped of all of his committees at the federal level after he was labeled a white supremacist, white nationalist. And, they tried to put the same label on me. But the problem is the media and this investigator, of course, failed to interview the two black pastors that live up at the supposed white nationalist, white supremacist compound, Marble, Washington, that holds, and God forbid, a God and country celebration every year. And this is the type of absurdity that we're seeing. And folks need to understand, it's not about President Trump. It's not about me. It's not about Congressman King. It's about we the people. They're coming for the people. We're just standing in the way.
That's right. And folks, if you don't understand this, the Lincoln Project, a new PAC, and I talked about this last week. If you go in, and I did a deep dive as to who these people are behind this. These are they're Republicans, they're not Democrats, but the most radical people within the Republican Party in terms of the LGBT agenda. These are people who were not happy with the log cabin Republicans because the log cabin Republicans said, hey, we won on gay marriage, let's just leave it at that. They wanted to demand that you gag Christians who talk to people about conversion therapy. And it's not therapy, it's about conversion. It's about the power of Jesus Christ to change lives. They don't want that talked about. And so they wanted to criminalize that in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, they wouldn't criminalize it. So this woman who's now part of the Lincoln Project, she's a co-founder of that, created the Lincoln Project. This is where these people are. And they're Republicans and Democrats. I think the common thing is their hatred of Christians. And we need to understand this is not going to be limited to politicians like President Trump and Matt Shea.
That's exactly right. It's not going to be, as you said earlier, very clearly, you have an investigator who donated politically to the downtown Seattle mayor, and you have these Marxists trying to overturn election results that they disagree with. I've been elected by huge majorities. President Trump was elected by a great majority, and I'm talking as far as Electoral College. And my point with this is that with Christians, I think America thinks we're immune, that it happens in China, it happens in North Korea, it happens in Nigeria, but it really is never going to happen here in the United States of America. And persecution already is happening. In fact, we received emails, we received also minutes from local meetings where quite literally they want to target Christians, create lists of Christians where they work, target their bosses. The Southern Poverty Law Center, for example, sent a letter to each one of my individual donors, and thank God they're people that listen to shows like Infowars and they're awake in the right sense, and they didn't budge one single inch. But in some places in America, people are given to fear, and they're trying to count on that fear to silence opposition and to silence we the people.
And it's been going on for a long time. You look at the Southern Poverty Law Center, they labeled the Family Research Council as a hate group because they opposed gay marriage. That was when it was being debated at the time, and that's when that guy, got a gun and tried to shoot up people at the Family Research Council, and he was stopped. But they came after Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A caved on this. They came after Chick-fil-A and said, you're a hate organization because you support marriage, and we want to redefine marriage, and you don't agree with that. So we're going to shut you down. We're going to label you as a hate group. We're going to prevent you from being able to do business. These people want to shut down your businesses. They want to kill you, imprison you, take you out of office, and do it all on the basis of their label without any facts whatsoever. One of the things, Matt, that I want you to respond to are these types of headlines from the LA Times, and we'll talk about that when we come back. LA Times, The Guardian, I mean, you've got international press focusing on Matt Shea. Why do they hate him so much? Well, I think you've already heard he is not going to be cowed down by these people. He knows where they're coming from. He's going to stand up for the principles of the Constitution, and he's going to stand up to these people who are operating on the basis of hate, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, trying to intimidate, to punish, to cancel, to imprison those they disagree with. We'll be right back. Telling the truth is not just revolutionary. It is treason in the empire of lies, as George Orwell said. And we're talking to the man that they're trying to accuse of treason. They're trying to accuse of terrorism because they don't like him telling the truth. Matt Shea, they're doing the same thing to Matt Shea that they are doing to President Trump with the impeachment process. Commissioning a report, spending $100,000, not talking to any witnesses, ignoring any testimony, not allowing him to question witnesses in his favor or to produce information in his favor that would show that he is not a terrorist. And then trying him in the press. I wouldn't say trying him, they're slandering him in the press. This story, for example, how to put Matt Shea in his place, from the Seattle Times. And this is a fact-free piece here. They start at, listen to this, despite strong evidence. Well, what strong evidence? They don't cite anything. Despite strong evidence that Matt Shea should be expelled for acts of domestic terrorism. The Washington legislative session will open Monday, January the 13th, with the House in conflict about his fate. Matt, you ought to sue these people for libel.
I'm in contact with attorneys right now, absolutely, because what is happening is the weaponization of labels. They're labeling me a criminal. There's been no due process. And we're going to see this over the next year. They are going to attempt to label Christians, constitutionalists, patriots. They're going to try to label us all domestic terrorists. And we need to understand that when you take that label and then you bring in a red flag law, suddenly you've got a reason to use to try to take away firearms rights, again, with limited to no due process. And it's already happened in Washington state. There was an individual in Western Washington a couple of months ago. The FBI went to the King County prosecutor and said to them very plainly, we have nothing criminal on him, but we need you to use the red flag law because of his beliefs. This was printed in the Seattle Times, and they went ahead and went forward to take this guy's guns. Now, his belief system is totally antithetical to mine, but they always start with somebody that everybody dislikes to use as a precedent against everybody later as far as like a larger group like Christians. And these are the same or very similar Marxist words that were used by Stalin, they were used by Lenin, they were used by Mao Zedong to say, you know, these are enemies of the state. We need to get rid of them. We need to strip them of their rights. And there was always a justification for it. And ultimately, that was two things: replacing God with the state, and the second was total control over the people. And that's what we're beginning to see right now in America.
And it's not just the Seattle Times, how to put Matt Shea in. He's a domestic terrorist, and we got lots of evidence. We don't need to go into any of that evidence or any of that, you know. But we've seen this also from The Guardian. We see it from the LA Times. Here's the title from the LA Times: Washington State Representative Matt Shea branded as a domestic terrorist, but he refuses to resign. You've been branded, Matt. Who branded you? They did. Did they show any evidence? No, they didn't show any evidence, but they've branded you, they've labeled you, and as you pointed out, this is a Marxist tactic of tyranny. You know, you're talking about these red flag laws. We just had over 1,000 people show up at the Virginia legislature about these gun confiscation laws, and we had a Democrat there saying, these people are all crazy. They're insane. I mean, they're already tipping their hat as to what they're going to do to each and every one of the people who stand up. They're all crazy because why? Because they're standing up to authoritarian Democrats who will kill them or imprison them. I guess that makes you crazy by definition.
Well, we're finally seeing what the socialists and the Marxists in America really think about all of us. They really think that we are domestic terrorists because we believe that the Constitution means what it says and the Bible means what it says. But most of the founders believe that, you know, and so what we're really talking about is we have part of the country that wants to follow the Lord in righteousness and continue to uphold the Constitution, and we've got a part of the country that just simply does not want to do that. And I think folks need to understand this is an intentional choosing this year. There's no more middle ground. Either you're an American and you want to uphold our republic, or you're really not and you want to undermine it. And, you know, it's very fascinating to see that Antifa, Redneck Revolt, the Socialist Rifle Association, the John Brown Gun Club, which all have very clearly online either been investigated for connections of running guns across the southern border, like in the case of Antifa, posting a terror training manual, like the case of Redneck Revolt, or the guy that tried to firebomb the federal facility in Seattle was wearing a John Brown Gun Club hat, and the Socialist Rifle Association being in direct contact with the Dayton shooter. You have actual facts in that case, but in this report, they cite Wikipedia as their number one source.
Yeah. They went to Wikipedia. Anybody can post anything on Wikipedia. They can post any kind of slander about anybody that they want. Let's talk about where you are right now, because we've seen a lot of reports saying you've been expelled or about to be expelled, or you've been suspended or whatever. Tell us what's going on, because now they've come back, Monday, January the 10th. What is the current status right now, and what do you think is about to happen?
Well, I don't know of any vote to expel me right now. And to expel in Washington state, there needs to be a 2/3 vote. That means some Republicans would have to vote for it. Approximately 9 people, according to my count, would have to vote for expulsion. However, there is a specific provision in the Washington state Constitution that says that if a member is expelled, they can never again be expelled for the same reasons if they're reelected. And what I know is that back in Spokane Valley, literally hundreds and hundreds of people have rallied to my side because they understand this is about them and not me. And there has been support from across the country that has come in by the thousands. And so there's a lot of support there for reelection. And I think that they don't want to put themselves in that position. I don't know if they're going to consider anything else, but that's what I know of right now.
The headline, again from the Daily World, stripped of party support, and yet it's only the party support of the House Minority Leader, who, by the way, supports sanctuary cities, doesn't he? The House Minority Leader Republican?
Yes, he voted for sanctuary cities and actually a sanctuary state, excuse me. Washington purports to be a sanctuary state, or a place where rule of law doesn't exist anymore. And I really think that this is important. More than just Washington State Republican Party committees at the local level, at the county level, have sent resolutions of support. We also had one out of Idaho, the Republican Liberty Caucus as well. So there have been a lot of messages of support, especially in regards to due process out there. So this idea, that, I'm alone or something like that, or isolated, not even remotely close. Thousands of people.
Yeah, even in that article, they had a couple of quotes from individuals. Ed Yasukawa of Seattle said, "I like him because he stands up for liberty." Peggy Hutt held a sign supporting you and said that you have been denied due process. She said, if he's done something wrong, where are the charges? And again, I've got an article here from Sherry Duvall of the Redoubt News talking about these different counties. Kitsap County Republicans had a very long resolution supporting you. She put that in the article. Also, Grant County Republican Party said they will pull all support from any legislator that supports removing you from office. Pierce County Republicans are questioning the integrity of the House Minority Leader Republican, Wilcox, this guy who made it a sanctuary state, or wants to make it a sanctuary state. Whatcom County Republicans are demanding that all of your rights be restored to you and your committees, and so forth. As you pointed out, the Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, Republican Liberty Caucus of Washington State, many of these other people, Yakima County. So it's not like you don't have Republican support. It isn't like you've lost your support. You don't have the support of people who have never supported you. And I've got to ask you, as left-leaning as the state Republicans are in many cases, are there any Democrats who would want to have due process? Or are they going to vote like like the flying monkeys of this new House Speaker?
Well, I think that some of the Democrats are scared. They're scared of the new Speaker. But I have been approached privately. And some folks are seeing this for what it is. That's a lack of due process.
They should understand. They should be very afraid of the mob as well, and they should want due process as well. VoteShea.com. Can you say one more segment?
One more segment, no problem.
All right, we'll be right back with Matt Shea. Stay with us. We're talking to Matt Shea. We got a little bit more time with Matt Shea. This is a final segment. Again, if you want to support Matt, VoteShea.com. That's SHEA. VoteShea.com. And he does need your support. We need to stand with people who stand on principle. There are precious few people in this country who are willing to do that. And one of the things that they hate about him is that he will act on that. He will make sure that other people get due process. And so now they're trying to deny due process to him. Nothing scares the left more than somebody who is a committed, principled Christian like Matt Shea. And I'll tell you why they're afraid of that. They're afraid of that because a Christian like Matt is dangerous because he can't be blackmailed. He can't be intimidated. He is afraid of God and God alone. And they don't like that. I'll tell you who you should be afraid of, though. You should be afraid of these godless politicians who think that they are God and who act as if they are God. Matt, we were talking about whether or not Democrats, if there's a vote that's going to be coming up here, if any of them would have the good sense, the common sense, the self-preservation to understand that if they support removing any due process, that they could find themselves, just like Robespierre did with the French Revolution, they could find their necks in the guillotine next, especially if somebody comes to power that is actually like these cartoon villains that they try to make you and President Trump out to be.
Yeah, and I think that there are some that recognize this, but whether they're going to be courageous enough to come forward, I don't know. There's a lot of fear. The Marxists are driven by fear internally, especially with party politics, driven by fear and to put everybody in their place. I mean, you read that headline in the article. They think that they can project that now outside of the Democrat Party, and I think it bears repeating that. Like Vox Day said, social justice warriors always lie. They always double down on their lie, and they always project onto you how they really are themselves. And if you want to know what they want for America for this year, they want violence. We just
That's right.
saw it thanks to James O'Keefe. We just saw it exposed from a Bernie Sanders campaign worker. And
That's right.
They don't want just violence. They really want to destroy Christianity. They want to destroy our Constitution and completely rewrite it. The Financial Times had an article advocating for UN intervention in the United States of America and the rewriting of the Constitution of the United States by Aloya Yerger, effectively an Afghanistan tribal council. In other words, not elected representatives here in America. Now, 10 years ago, people thought, oh, that's conspiracy theory, that'll never happen. Now it's being written about openly in some of the most major mainstream media publications in America.
Well, we had last night in the Democrat debate, I didn't get to it yet, we had Bernie Sanders saying our job is to build the United Nations. The United Nations' job is to tear us down, and they're trying to tear down every sovereign nation. It's a very dangerous time. We need to have people like Matt Shea, who agrees with us on these principles, who agrees with the founders of this country. Folks, if you want to contribute to his defense fund, the contributions are not tax deductible, but look, is your liberty tax deductible? Are you going to be held hostage by the IRS code? Are you afraid of spending a little bit of money in order to protect your liberty? You got to have people like Matt Shea in place. The North Creek law firm, IOLTA, that's who you make the check out to, with Matt Shea Legal Fund in the memo line, and you can send that care of the North Creek law firm, 12-900-12900 Northeast 180th Street, number 235, Bothell, Washington. That's spelled Bothell, Washington 98011. If we don't stand together, as we said, we're going to hang separately. Matt, they're coming after Matt because they want to come after you. It's just that simple. Matt, have you heard anything about if or when they're going to do a vote?
I haven't heard anything about if or when they're going to do a vote. I was told it very likely would not happen this week, but I don't know. And they're keeping me in the dark on a lot of different things. But I think that right now, I'm just going to keep telling the truth. I'm going to keep rallying folks to Olympia on all these issues. They have a gun control hearing in regards to banning magazines over 10 rounds on Monday. So we're just going to keep up the fight. And we can't let this stuff distract us either, because they do want us to be distracted in a defensive mode. We need to remain on the offense, attack, and defend this great republic in that offensive way.
Very, very, very true. You know, we just had Magpul Industries ship out 1,000 30-round magazines to the NRA, and they were handing it out to people at this recent rally in Virginia. You guys need to do that too. Call them up and see if they want to send a few your way. That's one way to get the message out to these gun confiscation people that they're not going to do that you're not going to surrender your liberties. We had, as you pointed out, they've held a lot of information from you. Like you said, you don't know when they're going to have the vote. You didn't know, you couldn't see anything that was in the report. You couldn't question any of these witnesses. It turns out that they were all anonymous sources, that they didn't actually talk to any witnesses. And even the minority leader, Wilcox, a Republican, did not give you any information, even though he had the report for quite some time, right?
That's correct. Yeah, December 4th, they were briefed on the report. December 19th, an hour and a half before it was released to the legislature, which is effectively publicly. That was when I finally got a copy of the report. So absolutely no ability to read a 108-page report in an hour and a half and respond. And I don't think the Democrats in particular wanted a response to this, because they intentionally redacted the witness statements from this. The witness statements were not even included in the report. So when you talk about anonymous sources, I mean, truly, it's, trust us. These are anonymous sources. And by the way, there's no context. And again, the principals, over 36 material witnesses were never interviewed as a part of this so-called investigation. And this to me, again, is really a precursor, an example, a template of what they are going to do to other Americans throughout this country this next year in the lead up to 2020 elections.
Folks, if the radical Marxist, and that's what the left has now become, they're openly embracing Marxism and socialism. They're not ashamed to use those words to label themselves anymore. Those people who label themselves as Marxists and socialists, if they can label somebody like Matt Shea a domestic terrorist, if they can get away with that, if they can get that echoed by The Guardian, by the LA Times, and by these other left-wing publications in Washington State, they can do that to anybody. This is way beyond Richard Jewell. You ought to pay attention to that movie from Clint Eastwood. This is way beyond this. If they're coming after a very popular legislator who's been elected 6 times to the legislature because he is too conservative, too Christian, too libertarian for them, supporting private property rights and individual liberty in the Constitution. They're not governed by those things. They want to take out anybody who is. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, people, if you want to support Matt, you can find information about what's going on at voteshea.com, SHEA, voteshea.com. And Matt, you have an open invitation to come on here and speak to the public anytime. We want to get your story out. This is a very, very important, very disturbing precedent, what is happening to Matt Shea. Thank you so much, Matt. We'll all be praying for you.
Thank you, David. Keep up the fight.
Thank you. All right, folks, we got to take a break here.